podcast was created for women by women to elevate women's voices. I'm very excited today to introduce you to our guest. Today we have Lynne Thompson. She is the adopted daughter of Caribbean immigrants in Los Angeles. She was the 2021-2022 Poet Laureate and received the Poet Laureate Fellowship from the Academy of American Poets. She is the author of actually 3 previous collections of poetry: Beg No Pardon, Start with a Small Guitar, and Fretwork, which was the winner of the 2019 Marsh Hawk Poetry Prize. Ms. Thompson is the recipient of multiple awards, including an Individual Artist Fellowship from the City of Los Angeles, amongst many others. And now she's actually published her most recent work. It was in April of this year, Blue on a Blue Palette, which reflects on the condition of women, their joys despite their histories, and their insistence on survival as issues of race, culture, pandemic, and climate threaten their livelihoods. And I'd also like to add that Lynne is an attorney by training with a JD from Southwestern Law School. So that is quite a list there. And when I said many other awards, I really was that didn't even do it justice. So Lynne, welcome to the podcast. I'm so honored to have you here.
Thank you for welcoming me. I'm so excited to be one of your guests. I've been following your podcast, and it's great to be included among these amazing women.
Well, I'm incredibly happy to have you here. So I would love for you to share your story with the listeners, especially how you were an attorney and got into poetry. Like that to me is like the big departure there for people. It's like, wow, what? So please share with the listeners your story.
It is pretty much of a left turn, but the truth was, as a young girl, my dad, who was a kind of a secret writer, read me a lot of poetry. I loved it, and I wrote poetry, as young people tend to do, really bad, horrible poetry, but I was writing it. But then I followed the please your parents route and decided to go to law school, which I am eternally grateful for. I learned a lot that I keep with me even now. But after 15 years of practice, one day I literally said to myself, you know, your life would be so much better if you were writing poetry. It just kind of came back to me in a rush. I would read it periodically. I would go to a reading occasionally. But one day I just thought, you need to really think about this. So I had been a litigator in several small law firms in Los Angeles. But I said, I need a job that will free me up a little bit more from being a litigator and allow me a little bit more time to study poetry and try to learn how to write a good poem. That was my ambition. And so I got a job at UCLA using my legal background. I was the head of their Employee and Labor Relations Department. And that really did, at least mentally, free me up to devote more time and energy to the poetry. So that's how I made the switch. I just literally said, I want to do something that's going to feed my heart. The law was feeding me intellectually, but it wasn't feeding my heart. So that's the change.
I'll tell you, and I have to ask you, if you don't mind, this question. Sure. Because when I was about 37, so I don't work in law, but I work in marketing and communications. And much like what your story just was that I did creative writing all the time when I was in grammar school and into high school. And then my parents separated, and it really took a toll on me. And I went from, it almost felt like I went from a creative spirit to a realistic. I had like a slap of reality. And I don't know if that's the right phrase for it, but I transitioned into, okay, I need to be real and get a real job. Like I have to stop with the fairy tale. And so I got my real job, quote unquote. And so for many years, I've been successful in my industry and everything. And I loved it for a really long time because I felt like, again, it was feeding me in a way. And then most recently, over the past 4 years or so, is when I started to have that itch that I'd really like to be fed in a different way, like something that's going to feed my soul. So I'm curious if that was more of how it felt for you. Because for me, it was like I hit this brick wall of like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
I think it was very similar for me. It just felt that this need to create something. It was interesting to me during the pandemic how many people went into artistic endeavors. They were painting, they were baking bread, they were say, I'll try to do dance. I'll play the video and I'll do dance in my living room, because I think the human spirit craves a certain amount of creativity and involving ourselves in it in some way or other. And so for me, yes, it really was, this is great, but and it was great for other people, but what am I doing to satisfy myself, to feel good about myself? And there was always this itching about the poetry, and so I just went back to it.
I think it's amazing that you made that decision and like really acted on it too, because what I'm sort of getting at here too is I think that for many of us, and it applies to men too, but I know we're talking about women today. So for many of us women, we do feel like we have to set our own desires aside or set our own needs aside. And in doing that, it's almost like tucking a little part of ourselves into a box and saying, you know
Absolutely.
what, I can't feed this, creativity flow that you really enjoy, because I really have to do X, Y, and Z reality stuff. And this isn't as significant. And in some instances, you can't do both. Like when my kids were little, like there was no way. I was just telling you my kids' ages. When they were all infants, I had a 1-year-old and I had newborns at the same time. So it was, I want to say about 3 or 4 years when they were very young. Everything I did, everything about myself was just focused on them. I did very little for myself, for my health, for anything, for feeding my soul. And that was needed of me at that point in time. But once they were a little bit more sustainable is really when it started to become like, all right, Jenny, like, what are you doing for yourself? And I think that that's like a barrier a lot of women have trouble crossing, and you crossed it. And it's amazing. And that's why I wanted to point that out, because for the women that are listening, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing your career. If you're able to figure out a way to pivot, or even to just make time for something that really lights you up, that will actually change your whole energy around you.
Absolutely. And you, I don't know if this happened with you. Certainly, in addition to just the difficulty of making the pivot to something like, I think I'll write a poem now. Well, I didn't really know how to do it in the way that I know how to do it now. And I was discouraged. My mother in particular, I remember saying, "What is wrong with you?" She said, "Is there any money in it?" And I said, "Absolutely none." She said, "Oh my God, you are crazy. You've got a good, stable career." So I get it. That's her generation. It's important to be stable. You don't know what's going to happen in life. Save your money, blah, blah, blah. My lawyer friends were, really? What is poetry? They just couldn't understand it. So I had to find my community, which was supportive, and that was great, and turn those voices off. And it was a little scary to do that, because I got to be honest, poetry is not the most practical thing in the world for someone to say they want to do. Of course, I still had a good job, so I wasn't worried in that regard. So and then I didn't want to go back to school because I'd already paid off my law school loans. I never wanted to see the inside of a school again. Okay, so how are you going to do it? You're going to find a community. You're going to go to take classes at community college or whatever you need to do to achieve what it is you want to achieve, which for me was to write the best poem I was capable of writing. Not all the people that I admired, and I wasn't aspiring necessarily to be like them, but to write a poem that I could look at and say, this isn't that. So I think you're right. There's so much around women in particular, especially if they say, I think I want to do this now. Well, no, it takes too much time. If you really want to do it, you can figure out a way to do it. We waste a lot of time as human beings. And what I
Oh yeah.
learned was how to use every moment that wasn't on my job or my family or anything else. If it was just 10 minutes, how can I use that constructively for my writing? And a young woman said to me, didn't it take longer? I said, yes, but that wasn't the point. The point was doing something that I wanted to do.
And it's interesting because when you find something that you're really excited about or really passionate about, you will find time. You will
Absolutely.
figure it out because it's going to eat away at you essentially. I had taken like a little podcast hiatus last spring, and I was very burnt
Yes.
out from, and because I have my daytime job still, and I'm podcasting, and the podcast, to grow a podcast, that takes time. It takes a lot of time and
Sure.
energy. And so there's a lot that goes into behind the scenes with research on my side, trying to make sure that I'm putting the podcast in the right like spaces. So I was really burnt out, and I was like, I'm going to just take like 4 weeks of not doing anything for the podcast. I'm going to schedule everything up, and I'm just going to kind of disappear and like focus on just being, and
Right.
I do practice meditation, affirmations, and I do that work just because that
Mm-hmm.
helps me. That's something that's really been helpful to me. And after the first like week or two, after I felt like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit better here, I started missing it. But then I was like,
Yes.
well, I'm like, I miss it, but should I really be doing this? And then I've noticed that every time I've thought to myself, like, maybe this is the last season, or, maybe this will be the last set of episodes and I'll just do a farewell and kind of cut it off. Every time something like that happens, like that thought comes to me, almost immediately after, somebody will say to me, like, well, why are you not podcasting? You should be you should be
Right.
podcasting. And in
Yeah.
this instance, it was my son who came to me and was like, Mommy, like, what, why aren't you podcasting anymore? And I was like, oh no, buddy, I'm just taking a little break. Like, I'm still doing it. And he was like, okay, good. Because it's really cool that you do that. Like, I really like that. And,
The greatest
it's like
affirmation ever.
this little voice. I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. And, my
Yeah.
daughters, like,
Yeah.
they're very encouraging about it. And it's very cute because the kids are 7 and 8 years old. And, it's those little brief moments. And I also wanted to
Right.
address your point, everything you've accomplished, it did take time in this world, in
Yes.
this space. And it wasn't something
Yes.
overnight.
Right. Absolutely. No, anything I can hear my mother, who talks to me frequently, anything worth doing is worth doing well, and to do it well takes time. So yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. And there are just so many surprises that have happened for me along the way that I never could have anticipated. So I'm more than happy to go with the flow and see where it takes me.
So your new work that you published is focusing
Yes.
on the condition of women. So I do want you to talk a
Yes.
little bit about that and how you landed on that as your focus for
Yeah.
this book.
Well, it was interesting. So as you said, I served as a poet laureate for Los Angeles in 2021 and 2022. Lovely, right in the middle of the pandemic. That made it easier. But during that period, because I was trying to do a lot of outreach via Zoom and every other way I could think of to the public, I wasn't really writing as much. And a friend of mine, also a poet and a professor, said, Lynne, if you have enough poems to put together in a book, maybe this is a good time. You're not creating something new, but you can assemble a book. And I said, well, I had a lot of poems, but I didn't really have a project, and I don't know. He said, look at the poems, which I did, and realized how many of them concerned women, their sexuality, their aging, their spirituality, their frustration, their rage. I should be saying our rage,
Mm-hmm.
not to separate myself, but all of the things that we as women have gone through and continue to go through, both culturally, in the workplace, all of that. So I said, okay, maybe there is something here. Even though I wasn't writing intentionally toward a book about women, it was clear that that was the subject that obsessed me. At the same time, I noticed that a lot of the poems either referred to the blues in terms of the musical genre or the color blue. And I thought, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but something's happening with the blue and the women. And I found that wonderful quote of Cornelius Eady, a fellow poet that founded Cave Canem, wonderful poet. And I thought, okay, this is what ties it all together. And his statement was, some folks will tell you the blues is a woman. And that really kind of brought it all together for me to say, okay, how can I move the pieces around and make the poem really speak to what he had said? So that was the beginning of it, and looking at the poems and realizing, and I'm thrilled, of course, now where we have a viable political candidate, not that we didn't before, but once again we do, and that has put a spotlight on women as mothers. Don't get me revved up about that conversation, or women not as mothers. All of that is really in the spotlight now. So I was very fortunate in the timing of this, that a subject that deserves treatment in any book to me was one I was able to put together in this book.
And I do want to say that I had another guest on the podcast that also she gravitated towards the color blue. And she had said to me that she didn't know why, she wasn't sure. And her handle, her name, like her episode launched on September 8th of 2024. And she calls herself Nurse Blue. And she has all these like through lines to the color blue. And she said, when you look at the significance of the color blue, it's meant to signify serenity, stability, wisdom, inspiration. And so I saw the title of I was like, oh, she also is.
Right. Something's going on here. There's something in the atmosphere. Exactly right. That sense of serenity, and yet also when you think of the blues, that sense of struggle, which women have had forever. And now in some ways it feels like we've taken 2 steps forward and 5 steps back, not because of women. So who does that leave? So yeah, it's timely in that sense. And also I'm very interested in history, so I was trying to put some of that in there. And it was really fun to put it together.
I love that your book is so timely, because I happen to agree with you with the timing of this. And, it's very exciting to me, your book and you as at your person and your brand, basically, that you're bringing with you to the stage, because all of these little moments to me are saying, like, yes, I do feel like we've had advancements, but I also feel like, yes, there's still so much more to go. But on that same note, this conversation has been bubbling up. And it's almost like when you shake up a soda bottle and you can just feel the pressure starting to fizzle up. That's what Absolutely. It feels like to me.
Yeah,
and
I think
I
that's
mean that
true.
in the most positive way, that's how it feels to me. And I dare I say, it feels like we're on the precipice of this is our time. This is about to happen for us as women. Really being able to show up and take center stage and really show the world, like, we've always deserved a voice.
Absolutely.
We should have always had a seat at the table, or we're crafting our own table at this point.
Or we're making our own table.
We're
Exactly.
making our own table. We're making our own chairs, and you can keep yours because we really don't want part of it. It's kind of toxic, and we'll do our thing over here because it's just, we're going to blaze our own path. And it excites me as a woman, but it excites me as a mother, because I have 2
Absolutely.
little girls that are going to come up in this world, and I want them
Absolutely.
to see this great example.
And I think also the example, you're the perfect host for this, an example of this, that, and I don't know about our male counterparts because I don't think of them in that way, but we can do more than one thing at a time. So I can be a lawyer and a poet. You can be a mother and a podcaster. We can shop and we can travel and we can do all of these, because that's been kind of our lot all of our lives, the expectation that, well, can't you do this and drop this and so I think that that's exciting for us as well, to say we're not just a nurse or a doctor or a minister or I'm not a mother, but that doesn't mean I don't care for the young ones in my family. I'm a great aunt, and have lots of little ones around and want to set the good example for them like you're talking about. So I think it's a very exciting when I see young girls in particular. I'm just so excited for them because the possibilities, and they have looked at their mothers and their grandmothers and their aunts and said, yeah, we should be able to do whatever we want. And they take that as a given. And we're saying, yes, it could be a given, but you're always going to have to fight this battle. So yes, it's an exciting period. And to the extent I captured any of it in this book, I'm glad it came across to you.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. And, you know, and it's interesting because with the focus on what you just talked about and saying like, you know, we can do multiple things or we can show up and be what we want to be. There's a like a little light in my girls that I see that, you know, I feel like that light, if not nurtured in the most appropriate way, is going to dim. And I think back on when I was younger and that, you know, I would show excitement for something. And because it wasn't fostered or, you know, nobody stoked those flames, it dimmed over time. And so it's interesting because one of my girls is very confident and forward. And she'll say, I'm great at this. And I'm always like, yes, you are.
Yes, you are.
Like,
yes, you are. I think that is such an important observation. It's only a generation or two away from our mothers, or if we were raised by grandmothers or aunts or whoever the female figure was in our life, to say on the one hand, yes, you should go to college or whatever, but you better get married just in case. Have that husband just in case. And not, you know, there should be a fallback because, you know, you might not make it. It was always kind of in the background, despite the encouragement. But now we can podcast at the same time we hold our daughters in our laps. So I think that's really important because they're coming into it watching you. Mm-hmm. You're remembering what it was like to get to where you want to be today. And that wasn't that long ago. For them, it feels like, oh, that was in the olden days, you know? Well, yeah, not that olden. Not that olden. So, yes.
It's funny to hear you say it like that. And yes, I was holding my little girl there because
and she's adorable. I could just tell from the top of her head, she's adorable.
She had a little belly ache of a moment. No, I think your work is incredibly important through the poetry. And I think that your subject matter is incredibly timely. And I think it's interesting too that you didn't see that through line immediately of like the focus of your poetry. Because it's almost like that message was trying to come out and be told. And it was just coming. And even if you wanted to stop it, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was just on its way to you. And you were really the vessel that was meant to be sharing this messaging. So I wanted to point that out too, because I think that there's instances where, and myself, I'm a perpetrator of this, where something comes and it's trying to like poke a hole to help break through to say, hey, like this is your new path. This is where you're meant to be going with this. And you were able to see that and you were able to break through and come out with this fabulous book of poems and be able to really share this messaging. And that's a wonderful thing that you were able to do that.
Yeah, I think because I didn't follow the academic route, and I want to be a little bit careful about how I talk about this. I was making it up in a way as I went along, and the things that resonated with me were the things that I wrote about. I am not entirely convinced when I talk to my fellow poets, some of whom have gone through MFA programs in particular, that they always got the encouragement to pursue what they were interested in as opposed to what their professor thought they should be writing about. I did not in every case, but I've heard a few people say that. So I was lucky in a way. First of all, I was older, so I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Basically. And second of all, I didn't have those constraints of being part of a program that was trying to mold me as a poet in a particular way. So I could take a workshop here in LA, maybe one in New York. I would go to conferences in the summer just to be around other poets, hear what they were talking about, what should I be reading, etc., and so forth. So I was able to forge a path, really, that was the path I wanted. Whether it was the right path or not is not for me to judge, but I sure did enjoy it. So yeah, I tell the kids in my family this, a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think you hear someone telling you something, listen to that. I don't know what it is in the universe, but it's saying, why don't you go down this road and see what it is?
It's very interesting. So that there, and I was actually going to point that out, so I'm glad you brought that up. So that there is almost like you have to be in tune with yourself and to be able to hear that and to hear those little voices. I had a situation recently where I was very upset about something that happened professionally for me in my daytime job. And I was very distraught over it. And it was eating into my weekend. That's how upset I was getting. And as I mentioned, like I practice meditation. The listeners are sick of me talking about it, but they know. But I am very in tune. Yeah, they know, they're aware. I'm very in tune with like myself and with my alignment. Like this is how I'm able to meet all you fabulous guests because everyone kind of draws in and we're all in alignment together. And so I was really upset, and it was it was on a Saturday, and I was sitting in my bed, and my husband and I got the kids to bed. And I'm starting to settle, and I was like, let me just take a couple deep breaths. Let me try to, relax my mind here. This voice popped into my head, and it said to me, "That's your job. It's not you." Meaning, like, this is just a job.
Exactly.
And it's not reflective of you as an individual, because you as an individual have gotten proved time and time again that you're great at what you're doing. So because someone else is doing what they're doing doesn't mean that like this is really you. And it's being able to listen to that voice. And I'm sure you've had moments throughout your career as a poet and even as a lawyer that where you heard this little nudge that kind of pointed you down a particular path. And that's how you got to where you got to today. So it's really important for the listeners, I want you guys to hear this, that like when you do hear that little voice or you have that little feeling, to go with it and really pay attention, because we've been conditioned over time to ignore our intuition. And
absolutely.
It's a huge failure.
I think it's a missed opportunity because, and as you were speaking, I was thinking of when I made the decision, I want to become the best poet I'm capable of becoming. I'm practicing law and I'm saying, I think I need to stop practicing law and think about some other kind of job. And what might that be? Literally, probably within a week of thinking that, I got a call from a headhunter who described the job at UCLA. And my first response was, well, I don't know. I've never done anything like that before. I'm not sure that. Hung up. The voice came back and said, is this not what you asked for? You asked for another job. This woman is practically putting it on your table. Call these people back. I called them back, set up the job interview. The only interview I ever walked out of in my life where I knew I was going to get the job. I knew it the day I had it. And so, or I felt fairly confident and in fact did get the job. So I say that to support what you're saying, that you get these indications from the universe. We all pray for X. Then when we get it, we think, oh, I'm not sure. No, this is what you were asking for. Go with it. It may not be exactly what you thought, or, there may be bumps along the way, but this is what you asked for. And I think that women in particular, oh, I'm not sure or whatever, the opportunity doesn't come along often. It may not sit on your shoulder very long. If you're not interested, I'll move on to the next person that wants to listen to me. So you really have to train yourself to think, I am not advocating going and, if you're not as good a walker as some others, don't try to run the marathon first day out, But if you want that, figure out how to work toward that. And when people offer you opportunities, don't dismiss them out of hand. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you. There's always that fear when you're about to take that leap. I know I personally feel this all the time. So I understand that.
I know that feeling.
The other thing, too, is to also recognize when something is not for you. So I recently was knocking on a door for something that I was like, this is it. Let me stop messing around. Let me just knock on this door. And I knocked on that door pretty hard and nobody answered. And I usually would have, old me would have gotten upset. I would have gotten depressed. I would have just been down in the dumps. And current me took it as, well, Jenny, you knocked on that door out of desperation. You didn't really want to knock on that door. You should continue knocking on the doors that you want to knock on. And those are the ones that are opening up. And those are the ones that open. Mm-hmm.
It's like I know everyone in America is getting these thousands of emails, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. You get 20 of them a day, however many. Mm-hmm. And one I got, I think earlier today, said, "This is the 7th time we've written you." And I said, "Yes. And what does that tell you if I haven't answered? Duh."
Stop knocking on the door.
Yeah, stop knocking on the door. So, yeah, that's the other side of it, is when to recognize, maybe this isn't really meant for me. No matter how much you wanted it, maybe this isn't the moment, and go on to the next thing. Because you're missing out on something else if you're so insistent on knocking on this door that refuses to budge. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's hard, though, to find that balance. That's why your podcast is so great, because we can all talk about it and support each other and realize you're not alone. Other women are going through this in some fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, absolutely. And the one other thing that I want to talk about that we touched on it lately was, don't get discouraged when you're on a journey where you're really doing something that lights you up. Don't think to yourself and compare yourself to the person who's like super successful. Because the person that's super successful, take a look at their history. Most likely, they've been at it for several years.
Absolutely.
And the person that, when I first started podcasting, the person that I was following, I called her my guru. And I took all these courses with her, and I was getting really into it. But then I was also getting down on myself at the same time, because I was like, how can I ever accomplish this? Like, nobody even knows me. I'm not on social media. Like, I don't know anybody. And then I started looking at the people that I was following, and I was like, well, let me look back. Like, how long have they been doing this? And I looked at some of their really early work, and I was like, wow, that's pretty awful. And I'm like, they started in the same boat. They started the same way, just they started sooner. And just continue trying. If you found something that you're passionate about, regardless of everyone's opinions around you, if you really love it, then you should go for it.
Go for it.
I'm still working my daytime job. It's not like I'm not one of those people that was able to quit and say, oh, I'm just going to focus on my passion. That's not realistic for me.
The average, I think it was Viola Davis that somebody was interviewing her, and they said, oh, it's like you've had overnight success. And she said, what?
Oh, no.
I've been working at this for 30 years. Yeah. To you, it might seem overnight. She said, but I know that isn't the case. And for most actors, writers, especially in the creative fields, the type of thing that the podcasting, which I consider creative, they got to keep the day job. This is not, and for poets, when my first book came out, I have 4 older brothers, and one of them said, are you going to quit your day job? I said, what is wrong with you? I said, okay, let me put this in terms you can understand. Stephen King publishes a book, and it's 250,000 copies printed right off the top. Mm-hmm. A poet is thrilled if they print 2,000 copies of their book, knowing that 1,000 will be returned to the remainder bin. So, no, I'm not really much. You have to be realistic about your passions. If you want to be a dancer, not everyone's going to be Misty Copeland. In fact, right. Nobody's going to be Misty Copeland, but Misty, So you have to be realistic about your dreams and yet keep plugging away at them.
Yeah.
At whatever level you achieve, knowing that even if you achieve the topmost rung, it's not permanent.
No.
So I was in a workshop with a woman, she's passed away now, Carolyn Kaiser, wonderful poet. She had won the Pulitzer Prize. So in this group of us, we're all just kind of worshiping at her feet and said, well, I guess now you don't have to worry about getting your poems published. And she said, no, I'm rejected now the same way I was before I won the Pulitzer Prize. So even when you achieve what is the pinnacle in whatever area you're trying to work in, it's for a day, a week, a month, but it's not necessarily forever. Mm-hmm. So you just have to be humble about it and keep your eye on what the real prize is that satisfaction that you feel when you do the thing that you love.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that feeling that you get, and I know this feeling through the podcast, when I get to connect with guests like yourself and talk about your story and the work that you're doing, every single time I walk away feeling lighter and excited. And it's the times when I'm not engaged with the guests, I have to tell you, I actually get sad. I miss talking with you guys. 'Cause I'm like,
talking with the guests, exactly.
And I have to tell you, like a lot of the guests I reach back out to after the fact, I'm like, hey, how's it going?
How's it going? Because, what's new? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, because once you're part of this podcast, to me, you're part of the podcast community with me. You're part of the Steel Roses guest cast, and I couldn't be more honored to have you with me because of your journey and what you've done and what you've accomplished is so amazing. I really
thank you so much. When I was going over, as I said before we went on air, going over the podcast and your website and thinking this is why I wrote that book. This is the reason I wrote that book, because we need to be there for each other, burn down the myth that, women are always fighting with each other. Well, yes, sometimes, but no more so than men.
Yep.
So why are we enlarging that myth for women? So it's equally my honor to be able to share what has been something of an unusual journey. I do remember one of the lawyers I knew saying, you can never come back to law again. Yep. And that kind of scared me because I thought, well, wait a minute, But I thought, well, we'll just have to see. I don't believe it. So I'm not having it, So yeah, it's scary, but man, is it satisfying when you jump off and do that thing that just has been obsessing your mind and you said, just go for it.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. Lynne, thank you so much for being on with me today and
thank you for
sharing
having
your story. Listeners, we're going to link in the description of the podcast Lynne's book, so you can take a look at the book and pick up a copy because it is truly inspiring work. So thank you so much again, Lynne, and thank you, listeners.
Thank you.
And everybody, will catch you on the next one. Take care.